So you would fold all these limbs in here like this. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having a wonderful day. It is Friday, November 17th here in South Georgia, and on today's video we're going to do a little figging around and talk about winter care for your fig trees. We're going to talk about at what temps maybe you should start to get a little worried. We're going to talk about what to do with figs that are planted in big pots, and also fig trees that are planted in the ground. So let's start off by talking about what temps you should be worried about when it comes to fig trees. Now, if this is your first time on our channel, we're down here in South Georgia. Used to be zone 8B with the recent reclassification. We're zone 9A now. And last year, when we had that Arctic blast, that was the first year I've ever seen any cold damage to my fig trees. We didn't get a lot, but we did get some. I think the lowest we got during that spell was around 17 degrees. The main problem was, though, it never really warmed up during the day, and it stayed below freezing for a couple of days there. So during that Arctic blast, we had a few of our 1-year-old trees that we had just planted earlier that year, get burnt back completely to the ground, like this little Hog Island tree here. Some of them recovered pretty well this year. Some of them, like this one here, didn't grow back that much. Then we also had a little bit of damage on some of our more established 4- or 5-year-old trees. Not all of them, but we did see some death on some of these older trees. You can see a dead limb right there. That's from the Arctic blast. I should have already gotten that out of there, but I'm glad I left it so you could see that dead piece of wood there compared to all the living branches we have on this nice looking fig tree. So as you can see from those couple examples there, an older, more established tree is going to be a lot more cold hardy than a young 1- to 2-year-old tree. So that's definitely something to take into consideration when you are making the decision whether to protect your trees or not. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we had a neat little chart that said if you've got an older established fig tree, it's probably good down to this temperature, or if you've got a newly planted fig tree, it's probably good down to this temperature. Unfortunately, we don't have that because there's a lot of factors that go into play there, and I can't fake cold down here. I can only tell you what I've experienced with the cold spells we get. So based on just what I have dealt with, I would say that when you get in the teens, you need to be worried about those really young fig trees that are planted in the ground. The older, more established trees will probably be okay. You might lose a limb or two, but they'll probably be fine. But when you start to get in the single digits, that's when you need to be worried about those older trees as well, because those single digit temps and maybe even some low teen temps can cause them to die back to the ground completely. Now, having your fig tree die back to the ground during the winter every single year is not necessarily optimal, but a lot of growers just deal with that. The tree dies back during the winter. Come spring, you get all this new growth sprouting back up. And remember, as I've told you before, figs are formed on new growth, not old growth. So a lot of people just roll with it that way, and they take whatever new growth they can get, take whatever figs they can get, and then they'll die back again in the winter. But ideally, you'd like to preserve some of this older growth if you can, because that's going to generate even more new growth in the spring and even more figs. So because it doesn't ever really get cold enough here to hurt an in-ground fig tree, I don't do much to protect mine. The only fig trees I'm really worried about are these baby fig trees in the greenhouse here. Got to run a heater in here every now and then just to keep these nice and warm and cozy. But let's assume you are in an area that's going to see some of those low teen or single digit temps. What can you do to protect your trees? So let's start out by talking about container or potted fig trees. This is a Salem dark tree that we planted on a video several months ago when we were talking about growing fig trees in pots and why you'd want to grow a fig tree in a pot. This tree here is looking pretty good. I don't know if this new growth here is going to have a chance to harden before we get our first frost, but I'm happy with how this tree is doing in this pot so far. So if you got a fig tree in a pot, assuming it's sitting outside right now, what you want to do is let the natural dormancy process take place. So when you get your first frost, which probably won't be a very hard frost, when you get that first frost, these leaves are going to fall off and this tree is going to go dormant. So after that first frost, when this tree goes dormant, what I would then probably do to this tree is just a little bit of tip pruning here. I've got 2 branches, but it wouldn't be nice to have some more branches next year. So I'd probably just come in here and cut the tips off these branches to promote more branching the following year. And how much you prune a container fig like this is just going to depend on how much space you have. If you're pretty tight on space wherever you're going to be storing this over the winter, you can prune it back pretty hard. If you've got plenty of room, you might not want to take as much off of there. So after it goes dormant and you prune it back a little bit, you want to keep this tree in a spot where it's going to stay dormant, but where it's not going to get really cold to where it could actually hurt the tree. So once it goes dormant, you want to leave it dormant until the spring. That means you don't really want to put it in a nice warm and cozy place because it will immediately wake back up again. So leave it somewhere where it's going to stay cool, but where it's not going to get super cold. And then in the following spring, when it warms back up again and the risk of frost has passed, you can put that container fig back on your patio, your porch, or in your backyard, and it'll take off growing again. So that's what I would do with a container fig to protect it from the cold. Now let's talk about all the options for in-ground fig trees. Now, much like that container fig, you're going to want to wait until you get that first light frost when the trees go dormant, and then prune the trees back to a manageable state where they're relatively easy to protect. Now, we've already pruned some of our trees back because we were taking a lot of cuttings to grow more trees in the greenhouse, but ideally you want to wait until that first frost to cut it back pretty hard. And so if you're trying to preserve some of that older growth on an in-ground fig tree in a colder climate, you're going to have to prune it back pretty hard so it's manageable and easy to protect. You wouldn't want to leave one looking like this LSU tiger tree here with all these side branches. That would be an absolute booger to wrap up or protect. Even this Canadria tree here that we pruned back pretty hard, there's a ton of branches there, and that one would be pretty hard to wrap as well. But something like this, or this, where the tree is not so wide and we don't have a bunch of branches sticking out everywhere, would be a lot easier to work with. So over the years, I've seen lots of different stuff being used to wrap or protect in-ground fig trees. Also, I'm sure there's some stuff that works that I haven't ever seen, but I'll tell you about the stuff I have seen that supposedly works pretty well. So one of the things I've seen quite a few people do is wrap the branches in foam insulation. You know, the little peel and stick foam insulation. We use it around here on our exposed pipes and stuff. But they'll basically take that and wrap all the branches of the tree with it. Now, obviously, the more branches you've got, the more foam insulation you're going to need, the more aggravating it's going to be. So if you're going to do that, you probably want to prune it back so there's not so many branches and so much to wrap. Now, I've seen some folks just roll with the foam insulation and let that be all the protection their tree has. I've seen other folks then wrap around the tree with all kind of different stuff to give it some additional protection. So I like to call this the Christmas tree method, and this Mary Lane tree here would be a great candidate for that based on the way I've got it pruned. So assuming you've wrapped each branch or just decided not to wrap each branch in foam insulation, what you would then want to do is try to bunch up all these limbs here. And fig limbs are pretty pliable. You ain't got to worry about breaking these things off. You can force them any way you want to force them. So you would fold all these limbs in here like this, and then you could take some twine, tape, whatever you had, kind of wrap it all together so you've got a nice tight bundle that's a lot easier to wrap. And so once you've got all these limbs wound up here into a tight bundle and wrapped with string or whatever you're going to use, then you would start wrapping around this bundle here. I've seen people use a lot of different stuff. I've seen people use burlap, like a canvas tarp. I've heard of people using cardboard, tar paper, or roofing felt. Lots of different stuff people use to wrap them with. I have heard that it's good to wrap right around the tree with something that has a little bit of good airflow on it. So they'll wrap that around the tree, burlap or something like that, and then come back around it with plastic tarp, something like that, is going to give you even more protection. And then what a lot of people will do after they wrap the tree in burlap, canvas, tarp, whatever they're using, then they'll take a bucket, and I can tell you a dog's bucket's going to work much better for this than any other kind of bucket. But they'll take a bucket and put it on top of that wrapping to give you some nice, soil to top of the tree protection. Now, to give you even more protection beyond all that, another thing I've seen people add to the process is putting mulch inside their wrapping. So using something like straw, hay, or even leaves to kind of insulate the tree inside the wrapping. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate this, but let's just use our imagination for a minute here. Imagine we have this tree wound up like I just showed you earlier, and imagine we wrapped cardboard or roofing paper around it to create like a little cylinder. And then we filled that cylinder top to bottom with some kind of mulch before we put the bucket on top. So as you can see, there are lots of different ways to wrap and protect an in-ground fig tree, and unfortunately I can't say, well, if you do it this way, this is going to give you X degrees of protection or anything like that. I would say if you're in an area that just gets down into the low teens a few times a year, you would probably be good with just the foam insulation on the branches and maybe some heavy mulch around the base of the tree. But if you're getting into single digits on a regular basis, you probably want to go a step further, wrap the tree like I showed you in something to protect it, and then put that bucket on the top. And then lastly, if you want to get really crazy with this, something I've seen done that apparently works is burying the fig tree. So what some people will do is they will dig them out a little trench here alongside this fig tree, then take a shovel and come in here and kind of cut some of the roots, but not all of the roots. They'll cut enough of the roots where they can basically lay this fig tree down in the trench beside the tree without disconnecting all the roots, and then they'll cover it with dirt, basically burying the tree so it stays nice and warm under the soil, and then they'll unbury the tree the following spring. Now, the whole tree burying thing does seem a little bit extravagant to me, and I realize most people are not going to want to go to those lengths to protect a fig tree. I would just as soon grow them all in pots if I had to bury them every year. But hopefully that gives you an idea of all the different things you can do to protect a fig tree, whether you're growing it in a pot or whether you're going to try to grow them in the ground. So I hope you enjoyed the video today. Don't forget to go check out our website, lazydogfarm.com, where you can find most of the fig varieties that we'll have available early next year. And if you missed that video that we did on pruning fig trees, you can see that right here. We'll talk about pruning young trees and pruning old trees. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.